President Trump is once again contradicting the White House's own top expert on the coronavirus. In a press briefing yesterday, the president said that the U.S. is doing very well when it comes to combating the virus, adding that it's, quote, receding. Well, more than 45,000 new cases were reported yesterday. It is a slight drop from the days before, but it's far higher than in early June, when the number of new cases in the U.S. was less than half of that. Weijia Jiang has the latest.
We're beginning to see evidence of significant progress.
President Trump insists the coronavirus is receding, contradicting his task force coordinator, Dr. Deborah Burks.
It is extraordinarily widespread. It's into the rural as equal urban areas.
It was after Burks made those comments that the president attacked her on Twitter, accusing Burks of bending to criticism from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, writing, quote, "Deborah took the bait and hit us. Pathetic." Later, Mr. Trump said he has a lot of respect for Burks, but sees things differently.
I told Dr. Burks I think we're doing very well.
But with around 1,000 Americans dying on average every day, the data backs up Burks. In an interview with Axios on HBO, President Trump was asked about his optimistic messaging.
Right now, I think it's under control. I'll tell you what.
How? 1,000 Americans are dying a day.
They are dying. That's true. And it is what it is. But that doesn't mean we aren't doing everything we can. It's under control as much as you can control it.
The death toll in the U.S. is over 155,000. But the president claimed the only way to interpret the numbers is by comparing it to the number of people who get sick.
Oh, you're doing death as a proportion of cases. I'm talking about death as a proportion of population. That's where the U.S. is really bad.
Well,
much worse than South Korea, Germany, etc.
You can't do that.
Why can't I do that?
You have to go by where. Look, here is the United States. You have to go by the cases.
Mr. Trump was also asked about his comments regarding Ghislaine Maxwell, the former girlfriend of Jeffrey Epstein, who has pleaded not guilty to charges she recruited girls for Epstein to sexually abuse.
But I wish her well.
Why would you wish such a person
first of all,
well?
I don't know that, but I do know that.
She has. She's been arrested for that.
Her
you know that.
friend or boyfriend,
Epstein,
was either killed or committed suicide in jail. She's now in jail. Yeah, I wish her well. I'd wish you well. I'd wish a lot of people well.
President Trump's own attorney general has said the evidence indicates Epstein died by suicide. When asked how history will remember civil rights icon John Lewis, who was laid to rest last week, the president said he didn't know.
He didn't come to my inauguration. He didn't come to my State of the Union speeches. And that's okay. That's his right. And again, nobody has done more for black Americans than I have.
I understand.
He should have come. But I think he made a big mistake.
But taking your relationship with him out of it, do you find his story impressive, what he's done for this country?
He was a person that devoted a lot of energy and a lot of heart to civil rights, but there were many others also.
All right, we want to bring in Weijia Jiang at the White House. Weijia, you covered a lot in that story. So let's go back to Dr. Deborah Burks and this thing where he had tweeted that she was pathetic, because what the doctor was doing, what the doctor had said, was that we had entered another phase in the coronavirus and that it was way more wide-reaching than it had been before. The president saw that as a reaction to something that Nancy Pelosi had said. And that's why he called the doctor pathetic. He thought the doctor was reacting badly as opposed to disseminating facts about the virus, which is Dr. Burks' job. So I want to ask you about his relationship with Dr. Burks, because he has really not been critical at all, and he reinforced the idea that he still has a lot of respect for her. His relationship with her and his general confidence in his coronavirus task force.
You know, Dr. Burks was sort of seen as a political survivor when it comes to the medical experts on the task force, because many sources here say that she figured out a way to walk a very fine line between, getting the information out to the public, but also keeping the president happy. And, I think that the other medical experts have found out the hard way, especially Dr. Anthony Fauci, what happens when you contradict the president, even if what you're saying is factual. And so this was the first time that the president attacked Dr. Burks. And you're right, he said it was because she took the bait of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who during an interview said she did not have confidence in Dr. Burks for the very reason I just said, because it seemed, according to the House Speaker, that Burks was enabling the president and allowing him to say things that weren't true to the American public from the presidential podium. And so the president said that that's the only reason why Dr. Burks said that there was, this very dangerous spreading of the virus, not only in rural areas, but in urban areas. But Anne-Marie, these are two very different things, because, by the way, Dr. Burks was answering a question that had nothing to do with Nancy Pelosi. The anchor on that network who was conducting the interview was asking about the trends with regard to the virus and where it is in the country. And later in that interview, she was asked to react in real time to what Pelosi had said about her. So these are two different things that the president is conflating to try to explain to the American public why Burks would say such a thing. Well, Burks said such a thing because that is what the data is showing her, that it is spreading. Mm-hmm. And in fact, Dr. Fauci yesterday during a separate interview backed her up and said this is something new that we're seeing, because we're seeing it creep up in places that we hadn't before, for example, in the Midwestern states. And that's why they are concerned. And he added that if we don't get a real control of this virus, the fall is going to be really hard for the U.S., which is something that we have heard before, because, of course, it could collide with the seasonal flu, and it could collide with some schools that decide to reopen. And that's why there is this race to try to stop the virus from spreading.
Right, exactly. Okay, on to the other big issue, the next round of coronavirus funding, stimulus funding. People are running out of money. There's the issue of, a possible sort of wave of evictions looming if people don't have access to that additional money to pay their bills. Negotiations resume today. The president has said he's willing to consider an executive action. What is he talking about? What can he do?
Well, at this point, they're still really banking on lawmakers getting together with White House negotiators and really coming through with a deal. And for the first time, we heard that, they did make some progress yesterday. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin said they're even open to a bigger deal rather than this very narrow deal that the president had been pushing for to address his two main issues, which, as you mentioned, are those unemployment benefits and a moratorium on evictions. And so now they seem to be open to negotiating something longer, and sources here say that they really have an end goal of the end of this week. However, we know how this works, and legislation takes a lot of time and a lot of compromise. So in the meantime, the president is considering what to do if this deal falls through, if nothing happens. And he has outside advisors telling him that there are things that he can do, which we chatted about before, namely, some sort of a payroll tax cut. Basically, every time we get a paycheck, we have to pay payroll taxes. And so the idea is to stop having to do that, to defer those payments, and to give people a little extra wiggle room with regard to spending money to pay their bills. So that's one option. And he seemed to talk about a possible effort to help people with their rent as well. But we really don't know what executive authority that he is considering, because even White House sources have said they don't want to get tied up in court. They don't want legal challenges. They really want, a clean deal signed by the president, negotiated by members of Congress, and that's why they are having these daily meetings to try to make more progress.
And I just keep thinking, Weijia, that the first round of funding, whether it was the PPE or, unemployment, was distributed so poorly that, you know, many businesses found themselves with checks that they were afraid to spend because they weren't sure if they were going to have to get the money back if they didn't spend it in a certain way. Some people are still
if they got
waiting
money
for
at all.
Employment checks to come through. If they got money at all, it was just so disorganized. Clearly more financial support is needed. But boy, round 2 has got to be done better than round 1, because round 1 left a lot of people falling through the cracks and they're struggling.
Right.
All right, so let me ask you before we go, one more topic. A new fight over the president's tax records?
Yes, this is a fight we've been talking about now for many, many years because, as you know, the president does not want to disclose his tax records, and he continues to try to block, this time, the Manhattan District Attorney, who issued subpoenas to try to get 8 years of those records. The president's lawyers have come back and said that those subpoenas were not justified and therefore should be void. But in a new court ruling, the DA says, wait a minute, no, these are absolutely justified because there is alleged extensive wrongdoing and criminal conduct by the president and by the Trump organization. And that's what he believes the tax records could help him prove. And so it is tied up in court. This is the latest, and I think it just really stresses the main idea that for one reason or another, President Trump, unlike his predecessors, do not want the American public to see his tax records. And so this is a fight that will keep going. We know that, you know, lawmakers are also trying to get a hold of those. And it's not because necessarily, you know, people just want to know the figures, but it's because people want to know the potential influence linked to the money of President Trump and his businesses and foreign entities, and, you know, what that could say about some of the decisions he has made during his presidency. That's why people are so curious and demanding these answers that so far we do not have.
I'm really glad that you were clear about that, Weijia. That is, it is about whether or not there are ethical issues, whether or not there are violations, issues with the emoluments clause. You know, someday I think we almost need to put together a flow chart of sort of the various legal cases that are either linked to his taxes or emoluments, because, you know, you hear about another case and then it just sort of floats away and something else, another discussion takes place. But you know, these questions are still hanging out there, and, you know, his first term is wrapping up. Weijia, always great talking to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anne Marie.